It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
So, and again, it does help when you've got bidders who aren't used to auctions and they just need a bit of time to get going. And a lot of the time, a bidder's strategy is to wait. And sometimes the strategy is to slow the auction down. And, that's all fair and good. Everyone wants to buy as well as they can, don't they?
And that is Mark McGoldrick in Hamilton in NZ, who is an auctioneer. We'll catch up with that conversation in just a moment. And welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast, talking once again about your property, your real estate trends for 2025. And if you've got a piece of news, you might be a first home buyer struggling right now with mortgage repayments, even after these cash rate reductions coming down. Let us know what the situation is, because so many commentators are saying how the rate has come down and that people have avoided the perilous mortgage default repayments. That is probably unfair because people are still struggling at the moment. So people haven't necessarily avoided that at all. It's just eased the burden. Also, let us know if you are an investor. What are you thinking right now about buying? Where are the areas that you're looking at? Or are you on pause mode because of the Trump effect? We just don't know what is going to happen. So email us. Our email address is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. We are on air every morning, 7 days a week around Australia, and we are up to a Thursday morning, June the 5th. Now, many of us are going to be having a look at properties today, looking ahead towards Saturday's auctions. Thursday's a busy day, go and have a look, and then suddenly get hooked into the idea, I might be raising my hand and heading along to the auction this coming weekend. So let's welcome in from across the ditch is Mark McGoldrick, who is an auctioneer, and good morning to you, Mark. Welcome to the Real Estate Breakfast. You know that we have a lot of Kiwis listening from your side of the Tasman, and I'm thinking that given the nurses are moving here, the police people are choosing a better paying condition, probably not that surprising.
Well, we never like to hear that. As Piggy Muldoon, you'll know him, Craig, he used to say it raises the IQ of both countries, but that's a bit glib. And it is a bit of a worry that people are jumping over the ditch. But it's not the first time we've seen that trend.
We've heard from some of the Kiwis saying that, the lucky country just looks a little bit more on for them right now, especially when it comes to pay. Now, I want you to bring us up to date while you're there, because we're going to talk about auctions in just a moment, but the cash rate, it has been tumbling. And what is the vibe with relation to your property market? How's the sentiment feeling? Because the other day you got another rate cut.
The fifth in a row, yeah. So we're pretty excited in the industry. And hey, it has increased activity out there in the market, particularly at the lower end of the market. So our first home buyer rates are really, really strong. Around about 25% nationwide is our first home buyers. But I would say in the Hamilton auction market, we haven't quite seen it multiplying the average number of bidders too much. We're seeing it better, but I think what you were saying earlier, Craig, is that external conditions that have still got people a little bit watchful and a little bit cautious, but definitely better. Yes, definitely better. I think we're down to around about 3.5%, which we've come from 5.75% OCR, so much better.
Are there people that are in that situation? As I say, commentators are banding about just how much more easier it is for people to make these payments. But do you know of people still struggling, even though it's come down as many times?
Well, absolutely. And there's a bit of a lag because people have locked in. I mean, no one could afford a floating rate 6 months ago. And so there's probably very few mortgages that have been able to refix at these lower rates. I mean, from the last 6 months, they're coming down, but I think now you can quite comfortably get 4.89% for a year, 4.69% for 18 months. So that's pretty good, isn't it, historically? But, people are coming off 6.89, 7.29, which, on a couple of $1 million, it's quite lumpy, and you would have talked about on your podcast, I've heard it, people who had fixed at 2.29 and 1.99 and then boomfa.
It's still very much a painful situation for many people that bought just prior to everything really going bananas. Now, I did mention that you are an auctioneer. I'd like to ask you this. What are some of the differences for people attending auctions between NZ and Australia? What are some of those differences between the two countries?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you go to an auction in New Zealand, you're probably going to strike the auctioneer as a hell of a lot more handsome or better looking. It's probably the first thing. It's quite different. The Aussies love an on-site, and we're slowly catching up with that. And we love the in-rooms because, we can plough through 25, 28 in a session, in 2 or 3 hours. So it kind of works, and we can control that environment and give to a certain degree anonymity to the bidders because, of course, you don't have to legally register in New Zealand. There's no paddles. You just come along and chuck your hand up. Sure, we try and identify those bidders and actually register them. It's a lot more circumspect to do that. And I wonder if the trend is changing in Aussie, where a lot of the time it was the real estate agent who was calling their own auctions. I know that the role has become a lot more specialised and not so much the case in Australia. I think in Victoria that still might be the case. So that would be one of the major differences. I think is in the Kiwi side, we possibly tend to start the bidding a bit lower. The old saying, start it low, watch it grow, just trying to leverage that psychology of, engaged in the auction and getting involved and getting into a good tussle. Find that one works, but I think the Aussies start a bit closer to that reserve price. And other than that, I think it's just the same old deal. Sometimes you get bidders that are comfortable and love it, and sometimes you got people who are absolutely bricking it in the back row and sometimes don't bid because they were too nervous.
Okay, we're talking to Mark there in Hamilton in NZ. We'll come back and ask him a few more questions about auctions after this.
It's the Real Estate Podcast, talking properties from 6 a.m. every day from every corner of the Australian real estate market.
A lot of people who haven't seen one of these container homes in person, I know they're not going to know what it feels like. So one of the big things is they say this is going to be too small, it's going to be uncomfortable. And then the second they get there and see the good use of space that we do, just makes it feel that much more open and habitable.
And what about somebody saying, well, I wouldn't mind joining 2 40-foot shipping containers together so that I've got a lot more space. Have you done that before?
Yeah, we sure have. And that is probably our number one question. Rather than joining 2 containers together and having to spend all the additional money on welding and then also never being able to transport them again, is having, for example, 2 40-foot containers side by side with a deck in between and a roof over the top. So what that does is it creates 48 square meters of living space. To be able to build that deck and roof between the two is going to cost you the same to weld them, and then you can also move them in the future if needed.
Let's explore together the power of real estate.
And it is a Real Estate Thursday. We are in Hamilton in New Zealand talking to Mark, who is an auctioneer. I wanted to ask you about those vendor bids. Is that something that you do in NZ?
We're allowed to do unlimited vendor bids below the reserve, and I know in most states in Australia, maximum of 2. Actually, the biggest real estate company in Auckland don't vendor bid at all. They say that's their point of difference. But I think it's a really important part of it. It was back in the bad old days where an auctioneer would take a vendor bid deceptively, without announcing it. But of course, the big real estate changes that came early in the 2000s means, it's got to be clearly identified and always well below the reserve or below the reserve. So, yeah, I mean, and again, it does help when you've got bidders who aren't used to auctions and they just need a bit of time to get going. And a lot of the time, a bidder's strategy is to wait. And sometimes the strategy is to slow the auction down. And, that's all fair and good. Everyone wants to buy as well as they can, don't they? Normally, we wouldn't place any more than 2, sometimes a third, sometimes more, but only in certain circumstances, really. So 2's plenty, I would say, Craig.
And tell us a funny story. I'm sure that you've got one in your kit bag.
I've got a couple, but the one I was going to tell you was I was doing auctions in Christchurch down in the South Island. The company I was doing the auction for used to, on a Thursday, great day for real estate, isn't it? They used to lease a nice big room down at a sports and library complex. One time a nice lady who was perhaps a little more senior in years had just dropped off her library books and she saw a flag in a crowd and she went in and 7 minutes later she'd bought a house. So here she was bidding away at the auction, and then we congratulated her. Well done, you've won. And the agent's saying, I don't really recognise her. Of course, you don't have to register, do you? Fortunately for her, after we sat her down and gave her a nice cup of tea and said, don't worry, the underbidder was good enough to pay the price that she paid. So she avoided that one.
Oh, that would be such a nightmare for sure. Now, a couple of days ago, we were in Adelaide talking to Emma there, a CEO of one of the real estate companies. Just recently, the Australasian Auctioneering Championships were held there. On Friday, we spoke to Jake, who was part of this competition. You ended up winning this, did you?
Young Jake the Snake, he's a pretty debonair young fellow. He was a finalist. I see he has a moustache, but man, it must have taken him months to grow it. But isn't he a great young guy? And yes, I managed to prevail. 11 years in the industry, fourth attempt at that, my third over in Australia, my second attempt in Adelaide. So that was quite nice to double back. Yeah, it was a real thrill. It's a hard one to win. There's some great auctioneers there. I had a little bit of luck emerging through the heats into the final from 17 down to 5, and then got through it well in the final. And yeah, I was just absolutely delighted to get the trophy at the end.
When you say that you got a little bit of luck, some of those people that you were looking at, other auctioneers, did some of them get knocked out?
Yes, in the competition, there's like 13 categories of point scoring, and one of them is to stay within the time limit, which was 16 minutes for the heat. Some very, very capable callers were 17 minutes 50 and even 18 minutes 05, and that was just too many penalty points. Their bad luck, but my good luck, I made quite a number of bidding calculation errors. I thought I was gone. I was number 6 out of 17, and I watched all these great auctioneers after me. Yeah, I was pretty surprised that I made the final 5, but of course the slate's wiped clean for that finals property and snuck through.
Oh, well, congratulations for that, because that is no mean feat. You talk about those people being knocked out. It takes me back to school with the senior tennis competition. I wasn't even in the senior tennis team. I ended up winning that mainly because some of these people that were in the senior tennis team ended up getting knocked out, and it sort of just made it easier for me. I had nothing to lose, and when we got into the quarters, I ended up winning my first, and then it was like, oh no, I got into the final, and the person was supposed to completely clean me off the court, but they self-imploded. It had nothing to do with my skill ability. It was just the fact that they jettisoned themselves from winning it.
Hey, that can often be the case in a finals with the auctions. There's pressure, there's nerves, and often it's the person who handles that side the best that will win. So good story.
Yeah, it was all just from my end, just about getting the ball back over the net, trying not to do anything too silly.
You can't be too safe these days. But hey, one thing I will say to you, Craig, is just the camaraderie between the New Zealand and Australian auctioneers is really a fantastic thing. They're such good guys and girls. We love catching up with each other, and it's hard to get a word in at the aftermatch, but it's always entertaining banter, and we share ideas, and it's just a really good, solid thing. So if you're ever near one, you should go to one.
Yes, we'll check it out for sure. All right, Mark, we'll wind it up there. Great to catch up with you there in Hamilton. Good luck for the rest of 2025. Thanks for coming on and sharing some of your stories with us on the Real Estate Breakfast this morning.
Hey, great to talk to you, and I could say kia ora, bro, to you, couldn't I? So I'll catch you later.
We help to break down real estate every day to help you better understand the Australian property market. We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.